get started.
Okay. Yes. Already.
It's a little cold and windy today, but cherry blossoms are in full bloom.
Lovely.
In Japan, the official year at schools, companies, and other administrative offices starts April 1st. So, right, a few weeks before, or a few days before, graduation ceremonies and farewell parties take place across the country. And almost at the same time, the cherry trees burst into blossom. So, as you probably know, Sakura is among us Japanese a symbol of a new start or departure. So when we see Sakura in full bloom in this season, we feel as if a brand new page has just been turned. How about your home country? Charles, in Germany also, are there any natural or social sceneries specific to this season?
Yes, I can say we do have something similar, which is also an outdoor event, and that is Easter. It's an outdoor event in which children in particular participate, and where they look in the garden, look all around for the eggs which the Easter bunny is supposed to have laid there. So Easter Sunday will be the 9th of April. So this is very close to this date today, the 30th. And so this being an outdoor event, it somehow is a little bit similar to the outdoor events which we witness in Japan when people sit down under the cherry tree and enjoy life and the new beginning.
Okay, I understand. When I look back to the first 1 year, I rather feel dismal.
Yes.
The main reason is that we couldn't stop the war in Ukraine. Everybody knows who is a criminal, who is a victim, but nobody could do anything. We only had to see another devastation day to day, and here the body count updated constantly, and the situation is still going on, and will probably last long. So this year, when I see Sakura in full bloom, I'm not so happy as usual. Feeling as if the hopeful nucleus had already been stained. How do you think the war will continue this year? Is there a chance for ceasefire? And if so, how does it come?
Yes. Definitely, you are right. I mean, we have to condemn the Russian action in Ukraine, and I'm no Putin lover, and I don't think there's any justification for the war. But I think Western politicians and the media and the peace movement have failed to recognize some of the conditions which both the Ukrainian president and also the Russian president have talked about. That is, last year in March on the website of President Zelensky, we saw a title saying Ukraine must have a collective security agreement with all its neighbors, with the participation of the world's leading powers. This was the title of this web page, which can still be accessed. And according to Zelensky, in the future, Ukraine must have a collective security agreement with all its neighbors, including the United States, France, Germany, Turkey, and others. And he said, these will be guarantees not only for Ukraine, but for Russia as well. And this is very similar to announcements by the Russian President Putin, who on several occasions has called for a modern, non-block system of collective security in which Russia would want to participate. But I have not seen any of the Western media or politicians or even the peace movement having acknowledged this fact or having responded in any positive way to these demands. And it seems to me that we can achieve a ceasefire once these issues are being addressed. Otherwise, I don't see a chance, and I think the war will drag on and it may become even more dangerous as it goes on. So these are very important conditions, I think, and they need to be talked about very much.
I see. Your comment helps me to move forward to the next topic in today's conversation about world order, post-war world order. And we want the United Nations to function properly. And we strongly believe that is a necessary condition. And let me get back to the basics. Article 24 of the United Nations Charter goes like this. In order to ensure prompt and effective action by the United Nations, its members confer on the Security Council primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, and agree that in carrying out its duties under this responsibility, the Security Council acts on their behalf.
Yes.
Can I read this text without prejudice? I understand this article like this. Each country must primarily trust the maintenance of peace and security to the Security Council, even if it is about the peace and security of its own. In other words, every member state must relinquish the national sovereignty and to make space for the decision making of the Security Council and the eventual activity of the international police. And so delegate the part of the national sovereignty related to the national security to the Security Council by some legislative action of its own parliament. But these days I learned from your research and published in an article that my comprehension of such comprehension of Article 24 is not so obvious or natural as I had long thought it to be.
Right.
There are two interpretations of Article 24, aren't there?
Yes.
Could you give us a little more specification?
Yes, I have also, just like you, for years and even for decades, believed that this article should be read the way it, anybody can understand it quite clearly. And we have rules for interpreting legal provisions. It's the statutory interpretation, which says we have to go by the wording, we have to go by what is the actual purpose, we have to go by the history. There are 3 or 4 or more criteria by which we should judge this provision in the UN Charter. And I have always believed that this is an easy to understand, basically. Nations have to delegate security sovereignty to the UN Security Council. And in fact, recently I did some more research because of this question arising whether this is really true. I mean, is our understanding, which is a kind of common sense understanding of the article, can this be verified? And so I looked into the 1985 French commentary on Article 24, which totally agrees with what we had thought, and which considers a genuine delegation by member states to the Security Council to be necessary. And this is very much in accordance with the French Constitution of 1946, which also states, with a view toward empowering the United Nations, that under condition of reciprocity, France agrees to those limitations of national sovereignty necessary for the organization and defense of peace. Now, this is clearly a reference to the United Nations, and very much corresponds to the Japanese Article 9, which also limits national sovereignty for the purpose of achieving an international peace based on justice and order. So this is very similar. In fact, these 2 constitutions, I believe, are the ones that have already, on principle, agreed to such limitations of national sovereignty, which is quite amazing. Now, the German commentary on the UN Charter and on Article 24, published 5 years later in 1990, contradicts the French reading. And that at a time when George Bush, when there was the chance and a lot of hope that we would get a new world order, with George Bush pointing out the possibility of realizing a new and different world, and saying, not since 1945 have we seen the real possibility of using the United Nations as it was designed, as a center for international collective security. So at that time, 1990, when the Cold War ended and Germany was reunited, this would have been a great chance for a German peace initiative that could have been successful, and more so since in my own correspondence as chairman of the German World Federalists with political parties and politicians, I found very much agreement coming from the Social Democrats, the Liberals, and even someone from the Christian Democrats, that they were favoring, on principle, a delegation of powers to the UN to embark on the transition toward genuine collective security and disarmament. But the German commentary, very clearly referring actually to the French 1985 commentary, says that this does not hold if we strictly adopt legal analysis, and that analysis would not support such an interpretation as the French have put forward. And therefore it was not necessary to take legislative action under Article 24. Now this is of course absurd, because if that had been the case, that no further action was necessary, then actually UN member states would have disarmed to the level of what Article 26 of the UN Charter stipulates, to the minimum. This actually, what you always thought, and what I think still and always think, was confirmed by one of the professors of international law with whom I corresponded. Very famous, he had also been the president of the German Red Cross, etc. Knut Ibsen is his name, who said that I do not believe that the states have already handed over the main responsibility for maintaining the peace to the Security Council in the sense of a transfer of sovereignty. Something like this would presuppose that the states have literally removed the hitherto existing competence from their area of competence and shifted it to the UN. So this is what he wrote to me in a personal letter, and which confirms both the French interpretation as what you and I believe, and of what makes total common sense, really.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
When we compare so-called German interpretation and French interpretation, it is quite evident that which of the two is negative to the establishment of the genuine collective security system stipulated in the Charter. The German interpretation is more negative, or decisively negative. German interpretation. I think that discovery is a little unexpected to the Japanese ordinary viewers acquainted with so-called German pacifism and internationalism of the post-war era. Could you give us a sketch that you have on your mind about the post-war German political history?
Yes, what you said also reminds me of something that the Christian Bonhoeffer, who died in a concentration camp protesting the Nazi regime, had said, that not to act is to act. That means if you do not do something that actually you should do, that is also a very negative statement. And so how did this happen? Your question is how can we explain from the post-World War II German history that this kind of negligence occurred? And initially, there were a lot of positive signs, like Ernst von Weizsäcker, who is the father of the nuclear physicist Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker, and the later German President Richard von Weizsäcker, and with whom I had, Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker, I had corresponded also, and he agreed with some of the things I said. I once visited him also. But Ernst von Weizsäcker, who had been a war criminal or had been accused of collaborating with the Nazis, he wrote in his memoirs that he thought that a world federal state would be a good idea. And in his memoirs, which was published in 1949, perhaps, which is the same time the German Constitution went into effect, he said that some people talk of World War III, and we can hardly imagine what that would be like and how this would destroy everything. And I cannot, he said, imagine that anyone would prefer this course to the other one which is open to us, namely the peaceful, united movement toward the federalist superstate. Of course, he said, the way to achieve this would be difficult and not without sacrifices. Interestingly, in the same year, in 1949, the Americans passed a resolution, two resolutions actually, in both houses of Congress, calling for the development of the United Nations into a world federation. But apparently nobody in Germany took much notice of these things happening, nor of Ernst von Weizsäcker's call for a world federal state, meaning a federalist system under the rule of law worldwide. And one explanation may be something which my professor at Kiel University, a professor of international law, who passed away 2 years ago, I think, his name is Jost Delbrück, a very good international lawyer, who said that, and who complained kind of, or stated that German realpolitik continued primarily along the lines of the Hegelian concept of power politics, which, quote, countered the idea of an internationalistic organization of peace with skepticism. And chances for substantive and, quote, sustained change in the German attitude toward a world organization aimed at securing peace were not positive. So, as I said, Delbrück was my professor of international law at Kiel University, but he was also the one who, in the 1990 German commentary on the UN Charter, gave this negative interpretation to Article 24 of the UN Charter. So my question also is, what kept West Germany from, for example, immediately after the Second World War, when our constitution went into effect, to submit to the compulsory jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice, which is also in our Article 24, paragraph 3, and which goes back to the history of the Hague Peace Conferences in 1899 and 1907, where Germany already rejected an international court with binding powers that would make it unnecessary to go to war, to go to court instead. And so what kept us from realizing what Ernst von Weizsäcker had pledged and following the US resolutions by taking appropriate legislative action? Now, one answer, of course, I have always known this, that denazification in Germany actually did not work very well. And both in the administration, in politics, in academia, people who previously had been teaching or in the administration during the Nazi era continued to have jobs. But one in particular was Hans Globke. He was the most prominent example of the continuity of the administrative elites between Nazi Germany and the early West Germany. Now, Globke wrote a legal annotation on the anti-Semitic Nuremberg race laws, and so set the path to the Holocaust during World War II. And after the war, however, becoming one of the most influential public officials in the government of Chancellor Konrad Adenauer. He had a major role in shaping the course and structure of the state and West Germany's alignment with the United States. He was an important figure in West Germany's anti-communist policies and at the domestic and international level and in the Western intelligence community, and was the German government's main liaison with NATO and other Western intelligence services. So here I find evidence of just what went wrong. It's like a train going on a track, and suddenly the tracks are changed in a different direction. You know, you were actually supposed to go in the right direction, but suddenly you're going in the wrong direction, right? And that has determined our policy with regards to collective security, with regards to the United Nations, and I mean, I could say much more on this subject, like why Germany only became a member of the UN in 1973. For example, you know, I've been thinking about this for a long time, and how is this possible? You know, we should immediately have submitted to the compulsory jurisdiction of the International Court, which would have sent a signal to the Russians also, who had, after all, invited the Russian Tsar Nicholas, had invited to the Hague Peace Conference, 1907. And the Russians must have some kind of memory of these. In fact, the Russian Tsar recently became, I think, and his family, which was murdered in Ekaterinburg, recently became kind of, what's it called, sanctified, sort of holy, kind of holy family. A few years ago, quite recently, as you know, some historical, not because of the Hague Peace Conferences, I think, but Russia also has a very strong and basic international law tradition, which also shows a kind of continuity from the Hague Peace Conferences until today. So we cannot disregard totally the Russian position with regard to international law, in spite of the fact that, of course, the aggression against Ukraine is illegal and contrary to international law.
Thank you. Thank you for a lot of interesting remarks. Your research on the two interpretations of Article 24 of the UN Charter is very, I think, is very instructive and inviting. And also, maybe Japanese viewers of this video must have been very interesting.
Interested? Surprised?
When they heard just now, when they heard the description, your description of possible German political history, because we often compared the two attitudes toward the World War II between the German government and German people and the Japanese successive conservative governments. And we always respect Germany and the German governments for their sincere attitude toward the war crime during the World War II, compared with the attitude of Japanese government, successive conservative governments toward what our ancestors, our fathers and our grandfathers had done in the Korean Peninsula,
Right.
China continent, and other Asian Pacific nations. So maybe they may have been a little shocked to hear your remark.
Yes.
And I think I can understand a little more why you came to Japan and continue your research or activity to seek global peace.
Yes, yes.
And
Yes, of course. I came to Japan because I was doing research on Shidehara Kyujuro, who was foreign minister in the interwar period, known for his Heiwa Gaiko, his peace foreign policy, and who after the war became prime minister and suggesting on January 24th, 1946, to General Douglas MacArthur the famous Japanese Article 9. And having studied this and published my dissertation both in German and in English in 2 volumes also, I came to realize that actually, in spite of the fact, as you say, that Germany, what Japanese people believe, that Germany has dealt with its past in a very good and effective way. And of course, we have apologized to the Jews and we have apologized for the Holocaust and so on. But by some trick of history, we have made it look like, and I wonder what Germany's role in this change in the perception of the historical narrative might have been, that it looks like as if Japan has not dealt with its past as effectively and as positively as Germany has done. But already many, many years ago, I came to realize that no, actually the Japanese have dealt with their past in a much better way than Germany has. And of course, if you read Maruyama Masao and other people, you can understand why. You know, there is a strong pacifism in Japan which supports Article 9. And in Germany, we don't have any movement, either peace movement or political movement, that is demonstrating and supporting Article 24 of our Constitution. You know, I would like to see demonstrations in front of the German Parliament demonstrating for implementing our Constitution's Article 24, just like Japanese every Friday have been and maybe still are demonstrating for maintaining Article 9, which Japan has upheld and maintained so far, even if there have been changes in the interpretation of Article 9. But just the fact that Article 9 is still there is, to me, amazing. I mean, I could shed tears on just this full realization of this Japanese trait of sticking to something which Japan has experienced with Hiroshima and Nagasaki, of course, and what peace means, really. Yes, I very much agree with you. And I wish, I mean, we have some Japanese friends who have who know other people, maybe scholars or politicians in Germany. I wish they would exert their influence to try and tell the German people. I find it very difficult to be heard in Germany with what I have to say. I recently had a publication which you referred to regarding this matter and the 2 interpretations of Article 24 of the UN Charter. But I wish some Japanese would tell their German friends, look here, why don't you become active and write a letter to the German government or to any political party or politician that, look here, you have neglected something and maybe you should think about it and try to take action and at least talk about it. You know, if what makes me very angry and sad and afraid also is that it's not being talked about. You know, it's like our rule-based Western world, which actually is not rule-based because there is no international rule of law in existence. But we always talk about, the rule-based Western system, which the Russians deny. So, you know, this is something that needs to be talked about, and I hope that with this interview and this video, perhaps we will reach some people to think about this and talk about it.
It is very nice having been able to talk with you under this
Lovely.
blossoms in full bloom.
Yes,
It can be done only once in a year.
that's right.
Thank you.
Let's hope for a new beginning.
Thank you.